Oh, hello, welcome to this webinar. Today we're running a rather special type of webinar. It's one of the series of events we've done around digital health, how apps are helping young people look at their health in a rather different way and their well-being as well. And what's different about this webinar is that we're linking up with a conference in Salford. We've got on one hand Emma Rich, who's involved in a project with Andy Miah on developing some research around digital health, and she's joining us from Bath. But we've got Andy Miah at the conference who's going to make a presentation around artificial intelligence and digital health and young people. And he's going to join us directly from that conference. Well, let's go over now and see if we can pick him up at the conference and begin the discussion from there. So let's go over to Andy.
So this is going to be slightly different. We're going to have a link into a webinar that's part of a Wellcome Trust project that we're running at the moment. So as you can see on the screen, hopefully you guys can hear me now over in Bath and London.
Hi.
Yeah, that's Emma Rich. And Francis, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. So this session is programmed partly in production with GlobalNet 21. That's Francis Seeley at the top. Middle, and Dr. Emma Rich, who is the PI for the project. And we want to talk about a number of things here, but particularly young people. And so we'll report on some of the findings from our research over the last few months, but also get into some questions about how young people may want to or feel about using AI for health purposes. We'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes talking about this, and then you might have noticed that we're going to go a bit longer than that, so it eats into your coffee break. So at that point, we'll invite people to either stay where they are and still take part in the conversation for a further 30 minutes, or go and get a coffee, or do a bit of both. So I'll invite you all to make your choice in about 15 minutes. But to kick it off, I want to just hand over to Emma Rich from the University of Bath, just to give you a bit of an overview of the project and what we're trying to do. We're very keen to make sure that young people have a voice within this conversation. And one of the concerns we have is that in all of these discussions about AI, we're in fact neglecting them. So over to you, Emma.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Just bear with me as I share my PowerPoint screen. Okay. We're all okay? Can we see that?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Hi. So as Andy says, my name's Emma Rich. I work in the Department for Health at the University of Bath. And this is a project that we're working on, funded by the Wellcome Trust. So thank you to the Wellcome Trust for supporting this. And in collaboration with there's two other people in our project team that I'll just mention who aren't with us in the webinar today. So there's myself and Andy, and then also Professor Deborah Lupton at the University of Canberra in Australia, and Sarah Lewis, who's also based here at the University of Bath. So yeah, the story so far in terms of our project. So effectively, we wanted to collect some data and really better understand young people's experiences of this vast range of technology that they might be using to both learn about health and then actually put that into practice in terms of their own health behaviors and things like self-tracking, reporting health symptoms and so on. So the project is the digital health generation, the impact of healthy lifestyle technologies on young people's learnings, identity and health practices. So we have taken a focus around healthy lifestyle rather than the sort of patient diagnostic or medical devices. But of course, within that, there is a vast array of technologies that young people are using. So we're working with 11 to 18-year-olds, and we've worked across, if you like, three key phases of data collection, which is helping us to build a very in-depth and complex picture of young people's use of various apps, wearable technologies, and more recently starting to ask some questions about what the future might look like in terms of digital health. So conversations around things such as AI. So really looking forward to hearing some of the comments and questions today around some of those issues. So the first phase was a sort of large-scale survey with young people aged 11 to 18. So we've had 1,000 respondents to that, and really we wanted to look at some of the key milestones in terms of what are young people using, what are their preferences, why do they stop using certain apps or devices, and then exploring issues around gender, social class, influencing factors, and also identifying technologies of common significance. So what are they using? So just getting that kind of baseline data, if you like. The second phase is more in-depth qualitative work. So we've been conducting a series of interviews with 14 to 18-year-olds and really trying to get more understanding of their experiences of those technologies, what they're learning, issues of trust and reliability, preferences, and how that's sort of shaped by different social context and influences. And then the final phase, which we're in the middle of at the moment, which is a bit more experimental, we're using a sort of real-time methodology, working with 7 families and trialing some of the technologies and actually doing some real-time data collection with them. So we're using WhatsApp and interviews before, during and after a period where they try different technologies. And one of the reasons we've chosen sort of real-time methods is that we wanted to get beyond this idea of influencing factors being just about affordability or the design of technologies, and actually think about the environment, family influence, peer culture, and identify some of the inequalities around that, as well as sort of opportunities and risks. So to do that, we really felt we needed to be talking to young people as they were using them in real time. So our kind of mobile-based methods allow us to do that and speak to young people about, well, why have you decided not to use that? Or why are you looking at your data right now? So we're in the middle of that, and hopefully we'll get a much better understanding of cultural, social, and family influences around digital technology use. So I thought just flag up a couple of key milestones or things that might preface some of the conversations that we have now. So 75% of the young people that we've spoken to in terms of our survey owned their first mobile or tablet between the ages of 8 to 11. So increasingly young people are getting online and starting to use these the software and apps at an increasingly younger age. And just a few other things to report before I hand over to Andy. So in terms of, we asked them what kinds of digital technology do they use to learn about health and to keep healthy. So a large proportion saying that yes, they use their mobile phone, but they're also engaging in tracking. So certainly some conversations to be had there around sort of AI and the role of those trackers. Instagram and Snapchat, their favorite social media platforms for health, and YouTube reported as the top site to help them understand health better. And when using the internet for health, 45% of them reported that they worried about incorrect information. And I've put that up there because it partly sets the context to some of the concerns that they were raising around reliability and this idea of, well, who are we talking to when we use these technologies? Is there a real person? So that just gives a background to the project, the young people that we're talking to, and the sorts of devices and technologies that they're leaning towards. So I'll hand back over to Andy now, and hopefully that's given you a flavour of the project.
Can I just say, before we go to Andy, can I just welcome everyone from GlobalNet 21 and say that if you're watching this and not just at the conference, you can put comments up as well. We'll get questions in the conference, but you can put questions up. If you're on Facebook, type it in the comments box. If you're on the webinar system, type it in the chat box, and we'll pick those up. We're doing quite a few events with Andy, and we've got the House of Commons meeting coming up, and we're looking forward to it. So we're really pleased to be doing this in this conference with him. So I won't take up any more time and go straight back to Andy.
Thanks very much, Francis. And as Emma sort of alluded to within her presentation, one of the key questions that we sort of face here is around trust. And a lot of what we asked the young people in the course of the research is about how they would feel about using AI for health purposes. So I'm going to try to share my screen, and we're going to see the presentation that I have, which for the first time, this is our first outing of data, which is for your exclusive viewing only. And yet it seemed to us that all these discussions about AI, all the theory, all the kind of regulative concerns we have, they all operate within a specific social context with specific individuals. And we wanted to get at some of those concerns people may have before we kind of find it's too late. So we wanted to ask people how they felt about using artificially intelligent platforms in the conduct of seeking information about their health. And as Emma mentioned, this is part of a wider project looking at digital health. And for us, there's this kind of seamless connection between the use of things like social media and Instagram and so on, and the applications that are being used for all kinds of health-related platforms. The example I often use is Spotify, which allows you to choose your tracks based on your mood. Well, there already we have the potential to infer health-related states based on the moods that people are choosing. So a platform that we would imagine to be simply about your music and what you like and don't like becomes this vehicle through which claims might be made about the state of somebody's health. And over this last sort of 5 years, where there's been so much interest and conversation about artificial intelligence, it rarely involves young people at all. In fact, I was part of a European Union project which was looking at life in 2045, very big meeting in Brussels, and I looked around the room and thought, not many people are going to be here in 2045. What do they know? And so it made me think about how we as a project could take this forward and see where we could develop some understandings about how young people feel about this, and hopefully that can inform some of the conclusions we make, but also some of the policy we may develop. And I'll mention at the end, we're going to have a House of Commons meeting on the 16th of May, which you're all welcome to register for, where we'll hopefully make some inroads into the policy around these areas. So one of the things perhaps to start off is that AI has become commonplace. It's become that underlying architecture of our lives that is now part of, especially young people's lives, who have shown far more readiness to take on things like Alexa and these home assistants that become part of our daily lives and part of our communities. Odd as it may be to think about these AI assistants as part of our communities, or indeed part of our families, this is the sort of language that people use to describe the presence of that machine, which is a world apart from, I think, where we've been in the past. So it's become a certain kind of everydayness about AI for young people, and perhaps also a certain willingness to embrace it as well. But the challenge, I think, is partly that many of these artificially intelligent architectures are below the surface. And some research from a couple of years ago shows that, in fact, many young people are very worried about it. And it makes sense, of course, because a lot of the conversations are about how AI is going to essentially make no jobs possible in the future, because they'll all be taken over by robots and machines, and there'll be nothing left to do. And I see this very much in our undergraduate population, questions about what sorts of skills they should learn, that they'll be future-proof for 15, 20 years from now. And it's really hard, because I may not even be there in 20 years to be able to teach them anything, because they won't need teachers anymore. And so this anxiety about AI transforming society in such a way that nothing can be taken for granted is, I think, a big part of this anxiety. Some other research from SwiftKey showed, again, that there's a massive sense of anxiety and fear about AI, particularly in the young population. So whilst you might think that everyone kind of gets it, it's something that people are very worried about still. So asking young people how they feel about artificial intelligence more generally is crucial, but especially in the context of something as personal as healthcare. And I'll give you one quote from this study that they found. Young people are more likely to fear robots in the future of AI than older people, perhaps because they're more tech savvy. So this greater awareness of some of the issues, perhaps greater engagement with them, leads to a certain degree of concern and fear about them. So moving on to what our participants said, we asked them a few different questions about using AI in healthcare. And we've got a few sort of topics that came out of them. So I'm going to give you just a bit of a sense of the themes that came out of those responses initially, just to give you a snapshot of what that looks like. So some expressed that there was value in using AI to assist a system that is already resource heavy and struggling to accommodate the range of health demands of the general public. So a willingness to recognize its efficiency and value in that respect. Still a desire for face-to-face consultations that, in fact, going back a bit to an earlier conversation about trust and whatever we're saying about the reliability of AI, there's still this sense, in fact, that the human is crucial. Participants expressed being overwhelmed by technology, that in fact one of the concerns they have is that everything seems to be mediated by an application these days, that in fact it's some kind of erosion of social life as a result of it. And of course, there's already apps, there's an app you can get for your computer that will turn off your internet connection every 30 minutes to stop you from opening up yet another browser to surf the internet. Participants expressed desire to chat with a bot if it was relating to a condition that they felt was embarrassing. So it provided some way of being private still, but still perhaps getting some advice. And if you think back to what we had before this, where you would have to kind of Google something to find out, this is hopefully for people a much more reliable way of getting credible information. Concerns about trusting computers, so whether in fact the system is working, and this seemed to be a particular concern. I think you can add to that the challenge of just digital literacy and being able to work the computer yourself, which I think is a key topic in AI. One participant expressed how text conversations were much more normal to their lives than telephonic voice conversations. So you can see how platforms that use a text-based interface, in fact, are much more appealing to young people because that's what they're used to, that it's a way of life to be messaging people all day long, and this may in fact allow them to be more open about their conditions. And another expressed a concern that it's such a personal thing that to focus too much around an algorithm and to be treated as an algorithm is one of the concerns that they have. So a few quotes that sort of speak to this. These are quotes directly from the data that we've got, which just reiterates some of the points that I've mentioned. But we can see how the efficiency claim is not just something that is felt by these participants, these respondents, but it's also a singular important principle for the value of AI in health more generally. This resourcing claim seems to be crucial to it. Another participant said it sounds faster, also especially in the first part, it would feel like you weren't talking to another person. So if it was an issue that could cause embarrassment, you could talk quite freely. So already we're seeing that there's a sense of being in a space that remains somehow private here. And it goes back again to the previous presentation about consent. To what are you consenting when you open up an AI health bot and start chatting with it? And what capacity do you have to understand the limits of that conversation and where it might end up? As I mentioned, the participant said it feels like a text conversation, so it's a bit more normal to be texting someone. This, I think, also speaks to the wider cultural shift that we've seen from one that is principally operating around voice to one that's operating around text. And taking into account that behavioral change in the design of AI is again, quite a crucial thing. What do you like about, sorry, let's get back to here. I think health is such a personal thing. Everyone's different and you can't have a computer run an algorithm. So here we have, this is perhaps one of the most crucial things, how you personalize AI health solutions in a way that feels human, that feels like you're getting some contact with someone that cares about you. I think there's an additional interesting element to this, which is in the global rollout of AI health applications, you potentially erode any kind of cultural nuances to healthcare at all. And I think that's something, again, we have to kind of be vigilant about in order to preserve some of those variations. But making sure that the algorithm is in fact something that we still feel resonates with how we want to be cared for. I think that's a crucial part of it. So efficiency and ease, I'm going to wrap up in a minute or two. Is that okay, Dave? Efficiency and ease, care continuity. This is a crucial feature as well, so that you're not just getting your intervention at every consultation, but actually there's real-time monitoring and response to what's happening that the AI is delivering. Access to data comes up, I think, is one of the major issues that people are concerned about, that in fact people want to have access to their data and be able to move their data in places that they would like. And again, this is one of the appeals, I think, of AI. Having a single source of truth on your health is also one of the appeals that we're finding, that being able to have a singular record that tells the story of your health life is another key part. Collective support. One of the reasons why we wanted to bring AI into this project is to draw out that connection between the social network that underpins many sort of health-related communities and the artificial intelligence aspect of it. So if you imagine a Facebook group for any specific condition that people are suffering from, think about the way in which that can provide support for people, and then wonder how further AI can be part of that interface. This is something we wanted to draw on as well. Personalizing treatment more effectively, making sure that AI can have a better understanding about what's actually going on within our bodies, and that real-time tracking is a big part of it. And then, of course, prevention as well. These seem to us to be the key values of AI and health. So the concern about the expansion of the data is one that we're particularly worried about, I guess. Thinking, first of all, what capacity data has to tell us something about health, but then also further wondering how that data may be used by different organizations. So whereas you might not think that you're using a health-related application, the data is nevertheless used and sold as that kind of information. That's something that seems quite obscure within many of the platforms at the moment. So just to wrap up, before we get into some discussion, as you can tell, these questions are very much live within our project. We want to expand this into using other methodologies to try to ask further into how young people feel about AI and health. And we're very keen to hear from you as to what you think we ought to do, both in terms of the methodology, how should we go about engaging young people, and we'll perhaps get into that in the wider conversation in a moment. Which communities of young people do you think we should reach out to? I sit on a Scottish Government committee and on digital participation. And one of the concerns is that all these digital interventions reach lots of people, but there's a perpetually disengaged population that just isn't anywhere near any of it. So how should we prioritize certain approaches to this sort of design to ensure that we in fact maximize the potential for inclusion rather than make it worse? What kind of public dialogue do we need at this point? We've had quite a bit of public mediated discussions around it, but what kind of public dialogue is required at this point, and which sorts of people should be involved with it? We have a couple of plans that we have in mind to sort of take further the public engagement aspect of it. One is to explore the idea, and again, in this respect, we're looking for partnerships as well to take this forward, both in terms of funding development, but also just in terms of getting our projects into places. So we're looking at after-school digital literacy clubs where we can work with schools to hopefully more empower their kids rather than be fearful of their kids using the internet. I have a 7-year-old son and I'm very aware that the teachers in the school just don't know how to begin with this subject. So trying to find ways to intervene there and support is one aspect of it. And then looking at developing a mobile health app store, a physical store in hospitals that allow people to learn about these technologies in a supportive space rather than them just have to Google and find things that are out there. And this is one of the things we're quite keen to develop too. And finally, just to remind you again, as I mentioned at the start, we have a meeting taking place on the 16th of May, to which everybody's invited. This is a meeting taking place at the House of Commons, where we will debate some of these matters with Lisa Cameron MP, who's sponsoring the event. The URL, if you want to find it, is tinyurl.com/digital health policy. So if you're keen to work within the policy environment in this subject area, then we'd love to see you there. So thank you very much. And we're going to have a little 2-minute break where people can stand up, get coffees, move around a bit. And then I'm going to invite Mark Davies, who I can't see, is at the back here. He's going to join me for a bit of a conversation about some of these issues for the next 20 or so minutes. So thank you very much.
Okay, while people are moving around, I guess we might as well take up the airtime as best we can and talk about a few things. One thing that interests me, and I think what some people are saying, and maybe Emma or Andy, you can answer that, is that the digital revolution and artificial intelligence and health is allowing us to do something that's not been done for years, and that's having a personalized service where all the agencies are joined up. Is that one of the things you see as a benefit of this? Maybe I could ask Emma while you're shifting around in the conference room, Emma.
Yeah, I think there's benefits and there's risks involved in that connectivity, I guess. I think one of the things Andy alluded to was this idea of who owns data, how can we access data, and where does it go? So I think one thing that struck us through the data collection is that young people are certainly aware of commercial investment in many of these platforms, and sort of highly critical of that, but they didn't have any sense, sort of, certainly the young people we've spoken to so far, the majority didn't have any sense of that data moving beyond the initial platform that they might use. So there was a sense of it in a way being locked in and owned by the initial app or product that they might buy. So that was something that was kind of new to them. So I think in terms of thinking through some of the issues around digital literacy in schools and supporting young people, that's something to think about, that trajectory of where your data goes. But there was also a sense, and I think there's lots of tensions around this, a sense of, in some ways, it being personalised and tailored to the individual, but also who is doing that, so that concern of it not being a real person. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I see artificial intelligence is working because Andy has just become cloned.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. Where are you? Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
over to you.
Maybe I can just introduce Mark Davies, who I've actually just met, so he's going to introduce himself. Tell us a bit about what you've done.
So yeah, so Andy and me have been friends for 10 or 15 seconds. So my name is Mark Davies. I am a general practitioner of some 25 years standing. I was the medical director of the organisation just before NHS Digital. I have worked for the last 5 years around data and analytics. I heavily involved in artificial intelligence initiatives, including chairing the clinical advisory board of a company called Your MD, which is an AI symptom checker. And I'm heavily involved in the global strategy for IBM Watson Health.
And I'll just say at this point, we still have some audience here. They didn't all leave. So if anyone does have questions from the audience, just put your hand up and we'll come to you. But I was interested to hear what you thought about young people and whether you'd had any work in this area at all yet before, whether you think they're included, what sort of state we're in at this point.
So I'm clearly ideally qualified to talk about young people on the grounds that I probably was one 30, 40 years ago. And I don't think, I think the kind of mature discourse with young people is a challenge for the NHS, not just in AI. And if you think about the traditional ways that we engage the public, those traditional routes are really good at excluding young people from that narrative. So this is something that we've struggled with, and it's just that much more visible in the kind of AI space. And actually, the experience that young people have of their digital environments is completely different from mine. And my own experience is that they have a much more nuanced, much more mature attitude to their digital world. So much so that the word digital kind of disappears. It becomes, how they operate, the social networks that they operate within it's presumed to be a digital, whereas for me it's kind of a big deal whether I'm on Facebook or some other social media thing. So some of the other things I've seen, particularly around mental health and young people, has been quite a sophisticated way of using social media. So people adopting personas, anonymous personas, and taking part in groups in a way that perhaps an older generation just wouldn't have thought of. I genuinely worry about the lazy stereotyping that we do around age. We do it all the time. This sense that kind of all young people are kind of all digitally savvy and all old people don't want technology, and of course it's completely rubbish. So one of the real values of the work that you're doing is it's drilling down to a level of granularity where you're starting to unpack some of that richness, because the reality is that young people are not a homogeneous group.
Yeah, we've got a question from the audience here. So Paul, do you want to give it a go and I'll see if they can hear it?
Yes, so I've got a question. So I've done a lot of work with NFBCC and Childline, made them an app all around digital health and things like that. So I've got a question. I don't think we're engaging these young people in the right way. how should we change our mindset? I mean, kind of like, I also work at a bank. We definitely do not engage them. And kind of like, should we be using their platforms, or is that again stereotyping?
Did you hear that, Emma and Francis?
Yeah, we just picked it up. We got the gist of that.
Okay. Do you want to have a go at that, Emma?
I've just written I can't hear the question.
It was a question about whether we should engage young people differently, that in fact we're not reaching them very well at all. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think going back to the points just made actually around, I think there are a group of young people who we assume are sort of digital natives. That term's been used a great deal, who are quite savvy and aware of these, the complexities of the digital terrain. But I think one thing we're trying to do through this project is get the experiences of those who don't use these platforms and understand. I think one of the challenges is the inequalities around digital health as we increasingly move towards a more digital connected system. There are still groups of young people who, for various reasons, certainly not just in terms of affordability, but choose not to use these environments. And I don't think we really have a handle on what those reasons are yet. And I think that's a massive challenge moving forward as it becomes increasingly digitized. So I think they're the group that, in terms of engaging with them, I don't know, I'd welcome some thoughts on how we might do that. But the fear and the anxiety, and so, you know, some of the comments that Andy spoke to around, you know, robots and, you know, being and humans being replaced. So there's this fear of this not being complementary but replacing people. So I think that's one of the barriers. And I think what will come out of our phase 3 is the kind of family influence, so that the sort of cultural values that are attached to certain practices, not just the technology themselves, but the practices of how we use these technologies within our daily lives. And I think you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of, you can take the digital out. These are just everyday practices that these young people are engaging with.
Can I just ask you, Andy? I mean, they practice this every day, yes. But what I found fascinating in your presentation that I didn't realize is there's a lot more pessimism amongst young people about the future than there is about older people. Now, I thought it would have been the other way around. They would have been excited about the technology, but you found the opposite. Now, does that surprise you as well?
Well, maybe if the universal basic income is high enough, there'll be a bit more enthusiasm for it. I guess, yeah, that sort of worry about the future. I mean, generally people, I think, worry about uncertainty. And so there's, I think, a lot of media coverage about the uncertainty that's present around AI, particularly around things like future employment. And we see that again within the university, we see that sort of anxiety emerge. So I think that a lot of it has to do with that. And there isn't quite so much around AI empowering people. And that's perhaps the bit that we need to shift a little bit as well. And that's where, again, methodologically, to go back to the point about the intergenerational aspect, one project we had a couple of years ago was to explore the future of robotics. And what we did was get families in where they had to build robots together. So they would have a conversation about what future robots might look like in the act of making their own robots. And we feel like that allowed some sort of dialogue to take place, which was both sort of supportive, constructive, but also got into the differences between the ages that both within the families we saw. We've got another question here in the audience, so over to you, if you still have it. The question was about the interest to have access to their data and what they might imagine doing with that data once they have the access. I guess we didn't get too much into that, but I think some of the comments were much more around the principle of just owning your data and having the freedom to do stuff with it at some point in the future, even if you don't know what it is. Yeah, I think so. But if you think about it though, you think about something like Nike running, and you try to move your Nike running data to another platform, and you can't. It's incredibly difficult to port your data from one place to another. So it may be a freedom that is then utilized at some point in the future, even if you don't know quite what you'll use it for yet. I think that sort of anxiety and freedom to make choices where that data can then be moved around is perhaps one part of it. But Emma, I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that as well?
Yeah, just to add, so one thing that's jumped out of talking to young people about making sense of data and whether they want access to it and what the future might look like is having a key other. So whether that's a teacher, a friend, typically parents who really seem to influence their understandings of the data. And so what, one example, a young girl talking about her father using a cycling app and tracking, and she then became more interested in where her data was going, comparing and contrasting with her dad. But for a lot of people, so this is where the kind of cultural and family influence come in. They had somebody through which they could talk to and help make sense of the data. Where there were young people who didn't have that kind of support network, there was less interest in what that data might mean. So I think for young people, there's also this sense of what kind of resources and support do we have in place for them to say, what does this mean? And where's my data going? And do I want to use this? Is it safe? So I think that's been quite a key finding for us in terms of this is not an individualized practice, it's a very networked practice.
You might actually turn it around the other way. So healthcare, along with many other industries, has gone through a transition towards being more self-service. And the generation we're talking about have never seen a world where their financial data is locked in a bank. They've never seen a world where to book a holiday, you had to go into these estate agents that controlled all the access to air flights and stuff. So why on earth would you not have your health data? So I think there's a with the healthcare industry is going through this kind of transition, but you know what? They're ahead of us. They're why not? It's my data.
So we've got another few minutes before we wrap up. Is there anything, Francis, from the discussion that we should pick up on, or can we get back into the audience here?
No, there's not much else come up. One thing that was interesting, we were talking about young people being a bit pessimistic, but it was a mixed bag, wasn't it? In some ways, it's great for them because they like the personalized chat. They like to be able to chat to a bot. It actually liberates some people to talk about their condition in which they won't in front of a human being. So they need a human being sometimes, but sometimes without a human being, they actually feel more able to talk.
Yeah, I think that's a big factor, certainly. And that's where the design interface really matters a great deal. And understanding even what the future of those designs might entail is I think, is quite an open discussion still at this point. So have we got any other questions from the audience before we wrap up? Yeah, we've got one more here. I'll repeat it again.
Okay.
Yeah, Emma, would you like to talk about this? It's where the young people were from. What was the sample frame?
Did you notice any difference between
Any differences in cities, rural areas?
Yep, so we've got quite a broad range of backgrounds and family makeup, gender. We're actually at the stage where, in terms of the survey, we're doing some statistical analysis to look for some of those sort of key relationships in terms of differences by gender, social class, prior use of digital technology. So whether that, really shapes what young people might be more comfortable using. Phase 3, I think, will be most interesting in that regard because we have rural, inner city, a range of different family backgrounds, and we're looking at how those influencers really shape what those technologies come to mean within the everyday practices of family life, peer culture, as it happens. So I think that real-time aspect is going to be crucial. So we've got a real diversity of families in phase 3, and we'd certainly be happy to report back on some of those findings. But I think it'd be really interesting to we're just seeing that literally unfold over the next 6 weeks. And alongside that, we're interviewing parents and caregivers to see what their perspectives are. So that intergenerational thing, I think, will really come out in this final phase of the research, and we'll be speaking to that a bit more at the House of Commons event.
And actually, one of the things about diversity is looking at those young people. I mean, one of the design peculiarities of young people is they tend to be well. They also happen to believe they're immortal. So their willingness to engage with health is limited, but there will be a subset there that actually have long-term conditions, or who have struggle with mental health problems, or have other serious health things that mean that the richness of their health record is much more significant for them. And it would be interesting to see the attitudinal differences in that sub-cohort of your group.
Definitely.
Okay. So I think we're nearing the end of our session. So Francis, anything further from you?
No, I mean that's fine. I think that was really good, and it's a very good experiment to do this, linking up a conference with an audience as well, and it's something we should do more in the future. All I would say is, I'll repeat what you said. If people are interested in the House of Commons meeting, to go to your website and take part in that, and I'm sure we'll do other events like this as well, because I think using this webinar system as well to get a wider audience and doing what we're doing today, streaming it on Facebook, we're keeping up with the technology, and we're different ages as well, so we're not doing too badly. Yeah. So I'm quite pleased about that. So thanks everyone for joining. And
got a question about comments on the chat, Francis, so just the comments that are coming up. Do not link to the NHS, avoid reinforcing a focus of health ownership away from individuals.
Do not link.
Trying to find a system that people are familiar with. This is, I think, a big problem with the dramatic change from even just your operating system of your phone. Managing your own digital literacy is just an ongoing life pursuit, isn't it? I mean, this seems to be, if artificial intelligence can require my phone no longer to have to make an update, that'd be wonderful. But that seems to be the situation we're in. And that persistence, that's part of when kids are developing. I mean, my son's still learning to use a computer with a mouse at school. And, it's not going to be a mouse in 10 years from now. So it's just wondering how you can nurture digital skills to prepare people for just how quickly these sorts of things will change is perhaps one crucial thing. But certainly one thing also just to bear in mind, I guess, also is how these platforms are still in transition. You think about live audio translations, which Skype's been experimenting with recently, and you can see how these sorts of innovations. I discovered just a couple of days ago that a friend of mine who's in France and who posts to Facebook doesn't post in English. In fact, they post in French, but Facebook automatically translates it into English for me, and I hadn't realized that. And I guess that obscurity of how the system works is perhaps one concern as well. But we are out of time, I think. So I'm going to especially thank Mark for jumping in here at the last minute to join in, and we look forward to being in touch with you further. And as Francis mentioned, please do join us in London in May. And thanks to Emma and the people that are online as well. And we'll just give a wave goodbye to everyone. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Andy. And thank you to everybody there.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And we'll close the meeting now, and hope to see you again in the future.